Love Finance is the Other F Word and want to support the show? Become a patron by going to patreon.com/FTOFW. You'll get special features, a shout out on the air, and early releases. Or if you prefer, pick up some merchandise at financeistheotherfword.com.
As fantastic a CFP as Mello is, and as wonderful an attorney as I am, please do note that anything said in our show are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Finance is the Other F Word, and today on the show I am going to be talking about gerrymandering. And I want to tell you guys, I have had so many technical issues. It seems like every time I go to update any type of technology I have, I just have issue after issue. So I've tested this, so hopefully you guys can hear me very clearly. You'll be able to see me in focus on YouTube. Fingers crossed, because man, it has just been a pain in my ass lately. Today I am flying solo because Zoe is currently with her family in the motherland in England, visiting family and recouping and relaxing. Now, just to remind you guys how I do all of my research, I go into a private Google window and I start with the question, and then I start following and opening links from there. And then if somebody in an article that I feel is, what's the word I'm looking for, that's a legitimate article, then I want to click on their links, because then I want to see where they got their information from. And as a reminder, not every link that I post I use, okay? Because sometimes, especially when you're researching things that are very political, you end up on a far extreme left or right website, and I very quickly look at that and go, yeah, I'm not going to be in here and take any of the information off of this page. However, it is a resource that I did look at, so I do disclose it, just so if you guys are so inclined and want to do your own research, which I hope you do, specifically on topics like this, that you can go and you can follow my logic and you can literally follow through the resource links, because that's pretty much the chronological order of how I did my research. A lot of you probably don't care, and I'm cool with that, but either way, it's there for you guys to see it. Now, before we get started, apparently currently on Hulu with a subscription, there is a documentary called Slay the Dragon that is in regards to the gerrymandering in Michigan during the 2010 midterm elections. I did not watch that documentary at all yet. I probably will, but as part of my research, it came up, but I did not watch it. So just so you guys understand that if you want to kind of take in this information on a visual standpoint, you can watch it on Hulu. I did not take any information from it because I don't know if it's a documentary or if it's a drama documentary, and so I just wanted to stick with just the facts. So let's get into it. So gerrymandering is named after Elbridge Gerry. And he was, at the time of his death, Vice President of the United States, and his party was the Democratic Republicans. And in 1812, when he was governor of Massachusetts, he signed a bill that created a partisan district in Boston that they compared to the shape of a mythological salamander, which I'm not really sure why that was relative, unless it's just the fact that a lot of times when we see gerrymandering, or back in the day when we saw gerrymandering, we would see districts that are really weird and misshapen, where it was clear evidence that one political party or the other had gerrymandered the district lines. So gerrymandering is the political manipulation of boundaries of a district. And this is intended, of course, to give an advantage to a party or a group or an economic class within a district's I can never say this right, constituency. Hey, woo! Constituency, bitches, look at that. I'm going to say it just all day. Constituency. It's probably going to come up in here again, and I'll probably fuck it up again. So remember in the Economics of Discrimination series that I did, we discussed redlining. Well, redlining was the practice of targeting zip codes with predominantly black and brown people or certain ethnical groups and not lending to them. Well, this is the same thing, except this is for voting, which means that while we will talk here in a minute that it does affect black and brown people also, this affects people kind of across the board depending on the location in which you live, which of course depends on how much money you have, as we've talked about on this show multiple times. Now with gerrymandering, you can also have a diluting of power. So basically what happens is that you can take a concentrated voting pool, which we'll talk about here in a second, and you can dilute the power of their vote. And this has been around forever. So even before 1812, when Elbridge Gerry did this, we saw that in the 1700s, Patrick Henry was designing a very specific congressional map to draw a district that would specifically block his rival James Madison from getting in. So we have this going on since the 1700s, and of course now we'll find out here shortly that with the invention of software, this has gotten far fucking worse. So let's talk a little bit about what the consequences of gerrymandering are. When a district is gerrymandered, that means that a vote does not have the normal strength that it would if it was maybe in a district that was fair and balanced. So what happens is that instead of voters choosing their representatives, the gerrymandering of a district empowers politicians to choose their voters. So listen to what I just said to you. Like, we go to the polls, and I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, but we go to the polls to vote for the person that we feel is going to do in something what is within our best interest. When a district is gerrymandered, it empowers politicians to choose their voters instead of us being able to choose our representatives. So, we the people for the people, that kind of bullshit is kind of thrown out the window. Gerrymandering allows politicians to choose where they're going to run and the most probable outcome of them winning. So think about Russia, okay? Russia has been holding elections for years, and I have a friend who is literally Russian, moved here last year, and she says that every time they vote Putin out. But then what happens is that Putin just goes, oh, no, I won. Or the puppet candidates that run against him are not ever designed to win. And even if they do get a foothold, and if they are somehow a legitimate opposing party that's ridden, Putin just comes in and says, oh, no, the election was wrong, I win. Does that sound familiar at all? So, in America, we value our freedom, okay? Freedom this, freedom that. And gerrymandering voids that freedom in a whole bunch of ways, which we're going to soon see. So whether you agree with my political beliefs or whether I believe in yours, the leveling factor is that when we get to vote, we each get one vote. So my vote should hold as much weight as your vote. So no American, regardless of party loyalty, should be okay with something that manipulates the political system in a way to benefit the other. Republican or Democrat, you have to know that this is fundamentally wrong. Now, gerrymandering, which I think is one of the things that bothers me the most, is protecting of incumbents. And again, I don't care what political side you're on, but I think that we need term limits. And I think that when we look at Congress, we see a whole bunch of old white guys in suits. There is a high demographic mean age of very older people who have made it their career to be in politics. And one of the ways that they are protected as incumbents is by gerrymandering. So even if you have a district that's controlled by a party A or party B, it also limits the fact that younger people or different people of maybe slightly different views within the same party can actually challenge the incumbent that's currently in. So it's not just devastating to Republicans versus Democrat. It is also the fact that within the own party, you can't maybe get a new blood in there that maybe isn't in the pockets of business or isn't in the pockets of people who have supported their campaigns. And so what happens is we see that these incumbents can continue to run over and over and over again by running these districts, and they can actually stay in power. And when incumbents are gerrymandering in the district, there is no real competition or threat to them at all. Again, I go back to my example of Russia. It doesn't matter if you're voting against Putin or for Putin, because Putin is going to stay in regardless. And this also discourages more moderate candidates from running. So if you're trying to win a district that is gerrymandered and you are of the opposing party, or you are of the same party but maybe a little bit more to the middle, it's very hard for you to distinguish yourself and get votes either from your opponent in your party or the opponent in the opposite party, because the district is so concentrated with people who think in a certain way or who always vote vote a certain way, think pro-life or pro-choice, right? They're always going to vote that way regardless. And so the thing is that when you have a concentration of this, you can't even allow more moderates in your party to step up. And when you have districts that are gerrymandered to sway one way or the other, they control state decisions. And then they control state officials. And then those state officials help implement federal law. And then federal law puts justices on the Supreme Court. So gerrymandering can also be tied to parts of the Flint, Michigan water crisis. And we saw that the fallout from that, many officials were legally charged with violations. And I'll be covering the Flint, Michigan water crisis in a completely different episode because I wanted to touch on it here in more detail and explain to you how they're both tied in. But the Flint, Michigan crisis is so deep that I decided to shelf that and was like, this needs its own episode to truly go through the amount of political corruption that was involved in that crisis. And when you make elections less competitive, then that makes Americans feel like their vote doesn't count. So then less people vote, meaning that less people have a vote, meaning that the concentrations of the people who come out and always vote, and we do know that there's different voting patterns between Democrats and Republicans and how they vote, whether it's in person or with mail-in ballots. But regardless, when you take away somebody's belief that their vote counts, then what you start having is you start having people less and less vote. And my friend Marianne, who I've talked about on this show before, she is libertarian, but she said something that I thought was very interesting. And she said, it's not red against blue, it's them against you. And when you're starting to dig in deep to the gerrymandering thing, you'll see here shortly that both parties have been found to be doing this. So this is a countrywide thing. Now, there is one party in particular that is on record doing it more, but both parties have been doing it. So how do they actually do gerrymandering? Like, how does it work? Two of the most common ways that a district is gerrymandered is by cracking and packing. So cracking basically is where you take a group of voters with similar traits and you take and you break them up across a whole bunch of different districts. So what you do is you spread out their voting power, thus diluting it and mixing it with other concentrations of people where their vote is going to be clearly not as influential and not as powerful. And so we see this when there's stock splits. So when you own a stock and let's say you have a share of stock and they do a stock split. Now you have 2 shares of stocks. Well, everybody gets really excited about that because they're like, yeah, I got 2 shares of stock now. Yes, you do, but the price drops. But more importantly, if you are a holder in a company of any consequence size as far as a shareholder, that may be where you're holding 20%, 25% of the stocks, just depending on the class that you're holding of the stocks, your voting power has just been diluted because the voting power you have to help direct the direction of that company has now been diluted over more shares. You've dropped as far as your power in being able to steer the direction of that company that you are an owner of. Packing is the opposite of that. And so when we see gerrymandering packing, we see that they take high concentrations of people who think the same way and typically vote the same way, and they pack them into districts. So again, any opposing party has no shot in hell of getting approved in that district. And so if we're talking about an isolated incident where we're talking about 1 district or 2 districts, then that might not be a big deal. But we see that there is a party in particular that has went through states and has packed 13 out of 18 districts. And so what happens is that they continue to get reelected and reelected and reelected because those districts are gerrymandered, and we're going to talk about how they can do that and then run that gerrymandered district for as long as they do. So there's the cracking and there's the packing. But then the another thing that we need to look at is when people self-sort. So a lot of times a district can be gerrymandered or appear to be gerrymandered, but in actuality, it's self-sorted. And this is where voters are purposely deciding to move to regions where people think the same as they do. and they have the same party affiliation. And so there is a website, and I have two wonderful resources from there. 538 is the website, and they are statistical website, okay? They're just about the numbers. They're not a party affiliate, and it's very interesting to check this website when we get close to presidential elections because they have been right, and they are specifically looking at numbers. And they have an interesting article where they think that it's not specifically gerrymandering, cracking, and packing as much as it is people who are self-sorting themselves. They also have a map where they have drawn in a whole bunch of different ways. You can go into the map of the United States and you can filter it depending on what you're trying to figure out, like what happened if the districts were cut geographically, what happens if the districts were cut by population, and you have all these different filters you can do, and you can see how the states would change from one party to the other if the districts were not in fact gerrymandered. And so I really encourage you guys to look at that. It's just fucking fascinating. And again, and it's spelled out 538, so you spell it out in words. And so the thing is that listeners, I don't, know if you agree with everything I say, and I hope you don't agree with everything I say. As a matter of fact, I think that you go on the journey with me, as you will find from topics that I've covered where I thought a certain way about something, and then I changed my mind after doing the research. And so this is why I disclose my sources to you, because I want you guys to either listen to me, and if you feel like what I'm saying is credible, great. If you disagree with something I'm saying, you can see the resources if you're so inclined, and you can go research it for yourself. I am not trying to sway you one way or another. I'm trying to do my best to give you the information as best I can on both sides with all of my resources listed. So I don't talk about this a lot, but before I continue, if you guys value the research that I do, please become a patron. Okay, you can do it for $3 a month. It helps us out. If you can't do that, or you don't want to do that, or you don't believe in supporting shows, hey, that's totally fine. But can you please go give us a 5-star review and a nice comment? Because I see the numbers of downloads, and then I look at the reviews, and the reviews do not correlate with the amount of downloads we have. Even if you just go there and hit 5 stars and don't leave any comment at all, it's really going to help out the show. And that's enough of that. Okay, so let's get back to the topic. So there's a couple different ways that districts are gerrymandered, okay? And so one way of trying to find them is by geometrics. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. This is where you look at a state's districts and you try to find a really weird looking district where you would go, okay, something's weird with that. Like, why does it have this little hook at the bottom? Or why is it, kind of pointy on one side? Let's go ahead and let's research that and see if that's been gerrymandered. However, we have all kinds of new software that's used now, and it can slice and dice data so quickly that it can just spit out map after map after map where the districts look more equal as far as size goes and maybe shape, but they're still completely gerrymandered and they're skewed towards one group or another. And so we see again that technology has stepped in. While it's making things great, has also made things shit at the same time. And there's a whole bunch of other ratios that are involved, and I'm just going to list them here, but I am not going to go through them. The Polsby-Popper ratio, the Rioch ratio, the convex hull ratio, and the perimeter test. And these are all disclosed in the resources if you want to go and look at them yourself. Now, there are studies out there currently that now indicate that a district's ability to get access to personal credit depends on how the district is actually outlined. Long story short, if you have a person who is in the pockets of financing, then if they're in cahoots together, then a financial lender can very easily open access to credit or target people of a certain district to have access to credit. If for whatever reason the opposing party wins that maybe is not hooked up with the bankers or the people who give credit, then they can take the credit out. And we know that so much of our economy is based on consumer spending. And people spend money when they feel confident in the economy or when they have access to easy money. And this is why we see the Fed is raising interest rates, because there is too much easy money floating out there. Now they're pulling it out of the economy because they're trying to slow the economy down. which they are doing, and potentially into a recession, but that's a whole nother episode. And so this works the same way when you're looking at a district that is gerrymandered. And so there is studies that have data that prove that. And I'm not going to get into that right now, but it might not prove it in all circumstances, but it does show that there is a high correlation. And so then I'm going to take you guys back to the economics of discrimination episode. And I know I tell you guys this over and over, but there is a lot of series that I have done where I have researched very detailed topics, and you guys need to understand that this is all connected. And so it's not that a party might be saying something you don't like. It is a whole bunch of stuff underneath it that's actually driving the way that either party is thinking. And a lot of times, as we've talked, it's not always clean. Right? It's not always clean. So if you think that this probably isn't a big deal, remember that the reason why we have a two-party system is because when we broke away from England, we were trying to get away from the total control of England and technically the dictatorship at that time. And if you keep people repressed, eventually those people are going to turn violent. And I don't care what side they're on or what race they are or who they are or economic class. The thing is that people will only not be heard for so long. Look at the protests that are going on in Iran right now with the women taking off and burning their hijabs, which is amazing, and I'm so strong for that. And look at the shit that's going on in Russia with the mobilization of him saying that he's going to pull up 300,000 people, but in fact, they're putting the number at over 1 million people, and people are fleeing Russia. So my vote is just as important to me as your vote is important to me, because we all have to be able to have a voice so that the majority in this country is truly represented. Okay, so you might be asking, well, where the hell are they getting all this information from? Well, this is how it works. Every 10 years, states redraw their congressional districts after the census. So as the census comes out, and people are expected to fill out the census, this is one of the places that they get information. And some states do hire independent commissions to handle the redistricting of their state. However, what happens is that most states allow their legislators to go ahead and take the data and draw the districts, which means that when a district is drawn, it's drawn for 10 years, which means that whatever party is in power at the time that the census comes around, if it's left up to the state legislation, which most of them are, then they are the ones in power who get to draw the lines of the districts for the next 10 years, thus putting them in power for longer and making it more probable that an incumbent is going to stay in power. And you see how this is just looping and looping and looping. And now let's break that off. If I am a incumbent from either party who has been in power for a very long time, look at Congress. We have in the House and the Senate motherfuckers that have been camping the fuck out in their positions for 15 to 20 years. Again, we need term limits. And this redistricting comes through, and they're in the pockets of their buddies who are either financial people, Wall Street people, or other business people. And if there's any advantage of helping that district and drawing those lines to make sure that they're going to take care of their buddies, do you not fucking think they're going to do that? And I don't give a fuck if you're a Democrat or Republican. You guys need to know that the politicians are focusing on them and not you. And so they take the census information, they redraw the districts every 10 years, again, allowing the people who are in party at that time, who are in power at that time, basically extending their reign for another 10 years and potentially protecting their actual positions. It's like the fox guarding the hen house. It's fucking crazy. And when I started researching this, you guys, I got so frustrated and upset because it just seems like there's just bad news after bad news after bad news. Now, not every district is gerrymandered, and there might be gerrymandered districts in your state or maybe not. But the thing is that you have to know that this does happen, and this does ultimately affect federal law, which affects you. Now, from the census, they know your name, they know your relationship to person one, they know your sex, they know your age, they know your date of birth, they know if you're Hispanic in origin, and they know your race. So out of that information, they can get a pretty good idea of how they think you might potentially be voting. And we will see here in a second that a lot of times voting falls on party lines, dependent sometimes or majority of the time on race. And the numbers just, they back that up. And when you register to vote, you pick a party affiliation. Now, on my voter registration card, I am listed as an independent for two reasons. Number one, because I don't want to be tied to one party. And number two, I don't want anybody targeting me because they go, oh, you're a Democrat, or oh, you're a Republican, and now we're going to target you and we're going to send you a whole bunch of bullshit propaganda that pushes our political things. So from your voter registration card, they know what affiliate that you are. And so between the census and your voter registration, they already have a ton of information about you. And so they know right off the bat how to sell to you to get your votes. But there's also us to blame. Fucking social media. And I covered this in the series on social media about all of the information that and how all the algorithms work on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, I think are the three that I covered. I don't think I did Instagram because that's part of Facebook. But anyway, those are the three I covered. I talked about how they got information on you, what they tracked on you, they tracked where you went, they tracked where you were, how you check in, where you check in, the things that you post, articles that you reshare. All of those are specific to a political affiliation. So if you're on Facebook and you're pissed off at the president, or you're loving the president, or you're arguing with somebody about the president, then it is very clear where your political allegiances lie. And on top of that, if you have a Facebook, like a heavy political platform like Facebook, which it has become, or Truth Social, it is very easy for any politician or any business person to target you based on information that you're freely putting out there, that data points that are very accessible and easy to mine on social media. But I digress, all right? So redistricting is currently happening right now as we are getting ready to go into the midterms. Now, there is a whole bunch of laws around gerrymandering, and let me tell you guys, there is so many cases that have been brought up between various different courts. And I don't have Zoe here to explain it for us. And to be quite honest with you, I really started getting in the weeds on it. And I'm like, I'm not a fucking attorney. This is way too much. But all of them, including the actual decisions and the actual court reporting, is listed in the resources if you want to go in there and read it for yourself. So let's just go super high level, and let me just get through some of the stuff so you guys understand some of the laws that are around gerrymandering. The biggest one is the Voting Rights Act, also known as the VRA, which was passed in 1965. And it was designed to protect against racial discrimination in voting. And then it was later amended to add protections against language minorities. So basically people who didn't speak English very well. And the Voting Rights Act was based on the 14th and 15th Amendment of the Constitution, that every citizen is entitled to an equal opportunity to participate in our democracy. So regardless of what party affiliation you have, everybody in America loves the fucking Constitution. So the Voting Rights Act is based on the 14th and 15th Amendment of the fucking Constitution. Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act requires that states and localities with a history of discrimination need to obtain approval from the Department of Justice or a court before changing rules, and this is known as preclearance. Okay, but in 2013, the Supreme Court, in a case called Shelby County versus Holder, decided that the formula for deciding which jurisdictions were subject to preclearance, and remember, they're only subject to preclearance if they have a history of discriminating against people due to race, socioeconomic class, or language, then they have to go through preclearance. So in 2013, Supreme Court in Shelby County versus Holder said that the formula to figure out if a district was considered needing preclearance was unconstitutional and outdated. And so they took one of the key provisions out of the Voting Rights Act. And remember, let me read this to you again. The Voting Rights Act was designed to protect against race discrimination in voting. And so we have districts that have a history of doing just that. So they need to go through doing preclearance. And in 23, the Supreme Court says, nope. The formula doesn't make sense. So we're just going to take that out. That's literally the fucking backbone of the VRA. So the Voting Rights Amendment Act, the Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2019 responded to those conditions of voting by restoring the full protections of the original Bipartisan Voting Rights Act of 1965, and that was later reauthorized by Congress in 2006. So basically, it was gutted in 2013, and then they re-implemented it in 2019. And in July of 2021, the Supreme Court made it difficult here, and another wonderful decision. In July 2021, the Supreme Court made it more difficult to challenge laws that restricted voting rights under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And in Bronovich versus Democratic National Committee, the court ruled that 2 Arizona voting laws did not burden voters of color enough to constitute a violation of the VRA. So as always, we have the Voting Rights Act that come through and tries to do something good, or a major law, and then they amend it, and then depending on which parties are in power and which parties are appointing the Supreme Court justices, they get to decide how the people in this country, if the laws affect them or don't affect them. And there's been other laws like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that was passed by the House that was trying to do various different things. And then also recently we saw that the North Carolina Supreme Court found that a legislature's redistricting plan was illegal. So this is still going on, and this is happening lots. And like I said, there's so many court cases that have been brought about, and depending on who's in power, it depends on which way the Supreme Court sways. Think of Roe versus Wade. This is why you should care about gerrymandering, even if your district happens to be gerrymandered for the political party that you align yourself with. Now, gerrymandering is used for politics and economics. And so again, there is studies that are shown that there is a correlation between people's access to credit, and there's a study from 2018 that is listed in the resources that finds that there is a correlation to the limited access that people have to credit based on who is elected or how it is actually gerrymandered. So this is a direct quote, and I'm just going to read this to you. And it says, elected officials, they have the ear of local businesses, including lenders, says Raleigh Heimer, the study's co-author and an associate professor of finance at Arizona State University. So lenders, quote, so the lenders therefore have incentive to make decisions that benefit those politicians, including by increasing credit supply. He goes on to say that when a politician is insulated from political competition because of redistricting, lenders have less motivation to prioritize services to constituents. Okay, so this is a professor of finances. So we see that it all bleeds back into the money. And so even though it seems like it's only politically motivated, it can also have economic ramifications. And again, I'm going to go back to the example of how it correlates to redlining, right? Because we know that redlining bleeds through generations of family wealth. So let's talk about how that can disproportionately affect people of color. So because of residential segregation and because of previous redlining, it's very easy to pack and crack a community of color. So let's go back to redlining. Remember how I told you that with redlining, if people won't give you loans, that means that you can't buy a house, which means that the places that you rent, there's less desire or less need for the landlords to keep up with the places, and then everything kind of around it starts deteriorating. And then we find that since it's harder for people to get loans of any kind, because when we're talking about redlining, we're talking about mortgages, but when we're talking about personal credit, we're talking about credit cards, lines of credits, car loans, things of that nature. So if you have a concentration of people who cannot get out of their location because they have a limited access to credit, it's very easy to pack these people into positions where their power is diluted. So it makes packing and cracking a lot easier because you have people who are not self-sorted in this case because they did not choose to go to those locations a lot of times, but they're stuck and they can't get out. So I touched on the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and I just want to bring this back here. The bulk of the communities that were affected, 40% of those communities were Black Americans because of exactly what we're talking about here. And so even though the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution say that you can't use racial discrimination in redistricting, even though the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution say that you can't use racial discrimination in redistricting, we see that race often falls on party lines. So people who are white and people who are non-white tend to vote differently, or tend to vote towards an allegiance of a certain party. And so this allows opponents to argue that the redistrict that they did had nothing to do with race, quote, to defend racially discriminatory maps on grounds that they were permissibly discriminating against Democrats rather than impermissibly discriminating against Black, Latino, or Asian voters. So in southern states, where there are large concentration of non-white people, targeting a community based on a majority of race is very effective as far as cracking and packing. And at some point, we're going to talk about how when they freed the slaves, there was so high of an amount of voting population that was non-whites that birthed a whole bunch of the political bullshit rules that we have now, which were literally rooted in the desire to make it so Black and brown people, their vote was less. And so even though we had, women's suffrage, and even though we had Black people get the right to vote and not other non-whites get the right to vote, when we do gerrymandering, it completely takes that out of the case. So in 2010, Republicans, in an effort to control the drawing of congressional maps, forged a campaign to win majority in many state legislators as possible. And they did this in battleground states of Pennsylvania and a couple others. And the congressional maps that they redrawn, like I alluded to earlier, they were able to lock in 13 of the state's 18 congressional districts, which basically means that they were going to be able to win the win the majority of the state's officials, even in the elections where the Democrats won the majority of the statewide congressional vote. Now, in 2011, Democrats gerrymandered in Maryland, and they won elections. So Democrats are not above doing this either. And we see that both sides are using software to figure out a way to crack and pack your vote to work it towards their advantage. And the officials are the ones who help bring business to your district, which helps give you credit, which helps your standard of life, which helps your paycheck, which helps your family, which helps your ability to get a home and put your kids through college and have a retirement. Do you see how this is all connected, you guys? If you take anything from my show, please understand that I will always tie topics back to other topics that we've talked about. Because when you understand the path of money and you understand the flow of money, you make better decisions when you vote. You make better decisions for your family. You make better decisions in general when you're making any type of investment advice. And so even though I am a licensed certified financial planner, I'm not going to talk stocks to you because stocks are a minuscule part of your overall financial strategy. You need to understand money. So anytime you hear about anything, follow the money. Where is the money coming from? Who is fucking getting paid? Because that person or group or political party that's getting paid, they're the ones that's really fucking affecting what the fuck is happening in your financial life. Now, in Virginia in 2015, they were ordered to redraw districts because 3 federal judges declared that the districts were clearly gerrymandered. So this is just every couple years, this just pops back up. So both parties are accused of doing this in various shapes and different ways. So let's talk about possible solutions to gerrymandering. Now, one of the things came up in my research, and I had never heard of this before at all, and I was very, very interested in learning about it, and it is called ranked choice voting. Now, this seems a little counterintuitive, so let me explain it to you, and then I'm literally going to read verbatim to you how it works because it's involved, and I want you guys just to know that there is a potential that might work to help gerrymandering, and there's a couple other ideas out there, but to be honest with you guys, there's less solutions out there to right gerrymandering than there is strategies to make gerrymandering possible. So this is how it works. In states, for example, let's say that there's 3 candidates, okay? And what you would do is you would rank them in order of who from, best to worst of who you would like to see the winner. So candidate A could be your 3rd choice, if it was elected, and candidate B could be your first choice and candidate C could be your second choice. So basically it's like a countdown. It's like, who do you want to be your number one? And then who would you want to be your number two? And who would you want to be your number three? So let me read to you verbatim what this is so you can kind of get a better grasp on it. So this is a direct quote from one of the resources I've listed. A ranked choice voting system, RCV, is an electoral system in which votes rank candidates by preference on their ballots. If a candidate wins a majority of first preference votes, he or she is declared the winner. If no candidate wins a majority of first preference votes, then the candidate with the fewest first preference vote is eliminated. First preference votes cast for the failed candidate are eliminated, lifting the second preference choices indicated on those ballots. A new tally is conducted to determine whether any candidate has won a majority of the adjusted votes. This process is repeated until a candidate wins an outright majority. And this is very interesting, and this would really, if it was adapted, put voting on its heels. Because the thing is that think about what that opens up to you. First of all, think about how that opens up a third-party platform. Right now, we are stuck in Republican and Democratic hell, and they're both crooks. But if we did use a ranked choice voting system where you were allowed to go, okay, first, second, and third, then that would allow a potential opposing third party to rise that might be kind of a more moderate in between a warm, creamy center between two very, very partisan groups. And you would be able to go, maybe I want my party, but I really like this third candidate. Or maybe I like this third candidate the best, but then I would go for my normal party. That opens up a whole expansion of different parties who could step up. This allows districts to not be as gerrymandered. And this would allow a more moderate candidate to arise. I mean, this is very, very fascinating. So is this the answer? I have no idea, you guys, but something has got to change because we know this is happening. And for people to say it's not happening is fucking ludicrous because there is case after case after case that has been brought before many state Supreme Courts and federal Supreme Courts where things have been changed and both sides have been found guilty of gerrymandering. And the thing is that in the end, the only person who loses is ourselves. Now, that is why I tell you, whether you're with the party that I align with or you're against the party I align with, your vote should mean as much to me as my vote means to me. And I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, but please go vote. Please go vote. If you are registered or get registered, please go vote because this is the thing that separates us from, at least for now, from having dictatorships. So that is everything I got on gerrymandering for you guys. I really appreciate you tuning in. I'm going to be doing more deep dive research. If you appreciate the research and time that I put into topics, first of all, give us feedback on what you'd like to cover. But more importantly, please consider becoming a patron for $3 a month or at least leave us a 5-star review. It's very easy. Go wherever you get your podcasts, click on it, 5 stars, you're done. You move on with your life. It takes half of a second, but for the show, it means so much more. And of course, follow us on social media at Finance is the Other F Word. You can follow my TikTok channel at FTOFW_podcast. You can also follow my second TikTok channel if you're a metalhead, which is Moment of Metal, obviously all one word on TikTok, where I do countdown shows. And I just talk about metal CDs that I love. And I count them down and why I love them. And so check that out if you're so inclined, if you're into that kind of stuff. Make sure that you tune in for the future. Please review us. Please consider becoming a patron. And with that, I am out this bitch.
Thanks for listening. If you like us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.